Inside a Missouri detention center,
It's my first time being in a facility like this. I was a little scared, I'm not gonna lie.
Sergio, an undocumented immigrant living in Missouri, is in a situation he hoped would never become a reality.
I don't have any family in Mexico. All my family is here.
He illegally entered the U.S. as a child, applied to DACA, which hangs in the lurch, and is married to a U.S. citizen.
She has a medical condition, so that automatically makes me the sole provider in our relationship, in our marriage.
Now he's on the verge of being removed from the U.S. Over a 10-year span, Sergio faced 3 traffic violations. The third stop on July 26 landed him in ICE custody, behind bars without bond.
They had me there for over 2 hours in handcuffs.
Just on the side of the road?
Yeah, on the side of the road for 2 hours in handcuffs, asking me the same questions over and over again. Just because you have traffic violations, that doesn't make you a threat to society.
Sergio's case is a prime example of the Trump administration's approach to ICE detentions.
Illegal aliens who stay in America face punishments, including significant jail time.
They used to target security threats and flight risks. Now, the scope of who fights from behind bars has widened. That means more federal contracts with local facilities, more resources diverted to immigration enforcement, and more local communities playing a role in detaining non-citizens from across the Midwest region.
They're getting pulled over for, a unpaid tag, and all of a sudden they are landing in immigration detention.
Maya King is a Kansas City immigration attorney. Her firm represents Sergio and other non-citizens fighting against removal behind bars.
There's an uncertainty as to how long do I need to be in detention, and when do I get to see a judge, when do I get to see my family, what do I do with my car that's still parked in the parking lot.
Detentions in Missouri soared more than 16 times from January to October of 2025 and jumped roughly 67% in Kansas compared to the same time span in 2024. Adding fuel to the surge, KCTV5 obtained photos of an internal ICE memo issued in July of 2025. It lists new guidance to detain undocumented immigrants who illegally entered the U.S. The policy also denies bond hearings, regardless of criminal background or time spent here. Sergio's attorney believes if ICE arrested him just 3 weeks earlier, right before ICE issued this guidance, his fight against removal would be very different.
I would still be able to work and have the ability to pay for everything.
Both King and local immigration attorney Rekha Sharma Crawford say the policy raises due process concerns. They say this sentence, quote, "The Department of Homeland Security coordinated with the Department of Justice on detention and release," is an issue.
In any other area of law, in any other court, that is called ex parte communication. It's unethical, it's unlawful, it's a violation of due process.
A federal judge in California ruled the policy illegal, but the ruling did not force the government to stop enforcing it nationwide. In a statement to KCTV5, Assistant DHS Secretary Tricia McLaughlin said in part, quote, "All detainees are provided ample opportunity to communicate with their attorneys and family members. Every single detainee receives due process. Get a grip."
He does not have the freedom to be here with us right now.
A wider detention net now also catching green card holders who had run-ins with the law. ICE held Columbia, Missouri's Owen Ramsing on 2 prior drug convictions from over 10 years ago. As KMOV reported, ICE detained Lincoln County, Missouri's Donna Brown for nearly 5 months. She wrote 2 bad checks totaling $80 a decade ago.
Criminal law, you've committed a crime, you've convicted, you served your sentence, you served your probation, you move on, right? You're done, you move on. But immigration follows you for the rest of your life.
After 39 years legally in the States, a judge ordered Ramsing's deportation back to the Netherlands. ICE released Brown after her husband Jim traveled to Capitol Hill twice, receiving assurances from DHS Secretary Kristi Noem she'd review the case. KCTV5 analyzed ICE detainees' criminal backgrounds from the start of 2025 to October. 44% of ICE detainees in Kansas had at least 1 criminal conviction, 35% in Missouri. In both states, traffic offenses and DUIs were the most common charges. But 16% in Kansas and 26% in Missouri had no criminal background. rates that so far more than doubled compared to a year prior. The government is offering some ICE detainees a choice: fight removal behind bars or voluntarily leave the country.
He was really aggressive in that sense. He wanted me to sign the voluntary departure.
Sergio refused. But as detention surged, so does the scramble for bed space. It's an issue the Trump administration is tackling with its One Big Beautiful Bill to meet its mandate for mass deportations. A senior DHS official telling KCTV5 the bill will help Secretary Kristi Noem secure greater and more cost-effective detention space. Locally, that reportedly includes a potential detention center for thousands of ICE detainees in Kansas City. A contract with CoreCivic's Leavenworth prison for more than 1,000 beds, which hangs in legal limbo. And the so-called Cornhusker Clink, a 280-bed detention facility roughly 20 minutes from the Kansas border. At the time of this reporting, ICE contracts with 7 detention centers spanning both sides of the state line for beds. We are at the Chase County Detention Facility in Kansas. It is one of 3 facilities that ICE is contracting bed space from in the state. The sheriff, Jacob Welsh, has agreed to speak with us and share legally what he can about how this process works.
We're probably seeing about 40 detainees a week in court.
An average of 109 ICE detainees a day sit inside Chase County Detention Center, according to Track Immigration.
We used to do immigration court 2 to 3 times a week. We're currently doing it 4 days a week, so that part of it has increased just a little bit.
Welsh says as of August, he still sees some ICE detainees are eligible and post bond.
As it pertains to immigration, they may be deported. As it pertains to a local case, they may get sent to prison. And we know that that's going to be hard on them, and it's going to be an adjustment for them and their families. But if we're treating people with the care and kindness as we can, all of them, no matter their status.
As for Sergio, he fought against his removal for 2 months in detention.
I feel really confident that at the end of this, the outcome's going to be what I expected to be. And that's me walking out of here and being able to see my family again and hold my wife again.
He was right to feel confident and is now approved to receive his green card. But for the thousands of non-citizens in Missouri and Kansas detention centers, it's a waiting game.
Bringing in the worst of the worst and getting them off of our streets.
As supporters say detention is a matter of safety, and critics say
The goal is to break the spirit, because people with a broken spirit will give up.
reshaping immigration detentions with consequences that will unfold for years to come.
Welcome back into KCTV 5 Plus Streaming. I'm Katie Bird, joined with Lauren Magarino. Lauren, thanks for sitting down with me. All week we're taking a deeper dive into your special, Beyond the Border. We've spoken about the arrests. Now we're going to focus more on the detentions. Again, there's just so much to learn here as well. And before we dive into this, I think we should start with the main thing on people's minds here in our community, and that's this potential ICE detention facility in South Kansas City. So, Lauren, where does that stand?
Yeah, so what we know at this point about that facility, which is, first of all, that the Department of Homeland Security has not confirmed that anything regarding that site or any others that have been brought up, which I'll get to in a second, but just off the bat, haven't confirmed that. Instead, we had 2 local officials, 2 local leaders say and confirm that ICE was at least touring that South Kansas City facility that you're seeing right now, and that the tour was conducted. And we also know that KC and KCK have both passed ordinances to prevent or stop a new private detention center from being built, within the next 5 years within their areas. So we know that much so far. And we also know that while those leaders have taken that stance around this, there's others who are supportive and even saying, hey, if you don't want a nice detention facility in your neighborhood, we'll go ahead and make it available in mine. So we had Representative Mark Alford, who was saying that and pitching that to ICE in Cass County. And so, we've seen kind of different reactions from this, but as far as any confirmation on whether or not something is moving forward regarding any of these facilities, we have not heard anything just yet. Another example of that is that Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver of Kansas City had said that he sent out a letter to ICE asking for confirmation and several questions. He was supposed to get a response by the 23rd, I believe, of January, and we have not heard whether or not he has gotten a response regarding his questions around that South Casey facility. So still a lot up in the air when it comes to that potential detention center.
Yeah, so then what about ICE's contract with CoreCivic and its Leavenworth facility?
Yeah, so that was hanging in legal limbo for a really long time, and it was all over whether or not it needed a special use permit to be able to operate as an ICE detention facility. CoreCivic was saying, no, we don't need it. The city of Leavenworth was saying, yes, you do. So finally in December, CoreCivic went ahead and filed an application for the special use permit. And now at this point, we're waiting because there's supposed to be some scheduled hearings that are going to take place in February and March. CoreCivic will be participating in that in front of the Leavenworth City Commission. And so those are kind of the next steps when it comes to this. And it'll be interesting because it'll be really an opportunity for the public to participate and express whatever it has on its mind regarding this facility and it being used for ICE detentions. And so far we've seen protests out of that community against it, and others who have also told us, you know, there's a history of detention and just like the industry of that being in Leavenworth, and understanding that you know, if there's a job at hand, and we've gotten that perspective as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out with those two public hearings.
Oh, for sure. And in Beyond the Border, you talk about how ICE already has beds in 7 detention facilities between Missouri and Kansas. So what's the backstory there?
Yeah, so there are 3 on the Kansas side and 4 on the Missouri side, as you saw in the reporting and you're seeing here now on the map, and they're kind of spread out. And when I was beginning to report on detentions in particular, you know, I started printing out a lot of papers, okay? So I brought them today. And what I mean by that is because ICE, it does have some detention facilities of its own that it operates, but most of the time it's using contracts with local, state facilities to be able to get beds to put people in. And so there are different ways and different kinds of agreements that ICE has to be able to add basically to its bed space. And I'm getting into the nitty-gritty here because it has everything to do with our access to understanding what these agreements look like. One kind of agreement is called an intergovernmental service agreement. That's a mouthful, but that is a direct contract with ICE and a facility. And so, for example, we went to Chase County Detention Center, which has this IGSA, and that's just direct. Now, there are some that ICE is actually a carrier on a different agreement. What do I mean by that? Well, the U.S. Marshal Service actually has agreements with local detention facilities and state detention facilities as well for its own people that it's looking to detain. And so it'll have agreements and ICE will be added on. So I was able to get access to those agreements that are between the U.S. Marshal Service and the detention facilities, and that gave us a little bit of a better idea of, you know, a daily rate for what they're paying basically for beds. But to be very clear, when you ask for it, you can't say, okay, can you give me the contract that you have with ICE? Because the facility will tell you we don't have a contract with ICE. They're being very specific because technically it's the United States Marshal Service and ICE is a rider. So this is an example of it, and we'll get like a closer view of it, but this is what I'm looking at. This is the United States Marshal Service agreement with Greene County Jail in particular. So this is out in Springfield, Missouri, and it states that the, you know, per day rate per bed is $100 again. And one of the things in here as well that we were looking for, not just the cost of how much money, but also how many beds are being contracted. So, for example, according to this agreement, this states that there are 375 federal beds. Now, that doesn't mean all 375 are for ICE specifically. Again, it's the United States Marshals Service as well, but you kind of can get an idea of the scope and scale of what that may look like. And so we were able to get a kind of a little bit of an idea between the U.S. Marshal Service contracts. You know, this is another one. This one is for St. Genevieve County Detention Center. So again, they have an agreement with the U.S. Marshal Service. ICE is a rider on this. and we asked and requested to see the intergovernmental service agreement between the detention centers and ICE. We weren't able to obtain those, but instead what we found were amendments to those agreements. And so over the years, there's been different changes that have been made. You know, you think life gets more expensive, the cost of things gets more expensive, so these facilities will reach out asking to amend the agreement, mostly for getting more money, essentially. And so we have examples of those. They're redacted, so you don't really get to see as much all of the information that we're looking for, but that is how we can gauge that there is some level of contract, right, between these facilities. And so here, I mentioned Chase County Detention Center earlier. You know, they've been contracting with ICE directly since 2008. So there's a storied history there. And, you know, one of the amendments was made in 2017. That's what this one is. So I've had to mark that. And as an example, it was showing an amendment to funding for transportation, the cost of transportation, and that amendment was asking for more money just to transport ICE detainees, and they were able to get $1 million. That's what it's earmarked for on this paper. So, you know, that's just one item, if you will, that was being addressed there. Again, that was back in 2017. It's unclear what that number looks like now, and again, what the total contract amount would be for. But there's tons of them. There's tons of them, tons of amendments. We do have a request out, a public request out for the federal Leavenworth detention facility that ICE, it has confirmed that it is working with ICE and contracting beds. That request went out back in July of 2025, and we are still waiting on those documents to be given to us. And so part of that, it takes time, but also if you recall that a federal government shutdown played a big role in delaying that as well. So I'm maintaining that request and keeping up with it, and hopefully we can get a better understanding of the contract with FCI Leavenworth is what it's called, which is not to be confused with CoreCivic's Leavenworth Detention Facility. That's a private company, but the federal government and how it's contracting beds.
Wow. Lauren, let's turn next to the no bond policy. So you reported that a federal judge actually in California ruled this policy to be illegal, but the ruling did not force the government to stop enforcing it across the entire nation. So what does that mean for ICE detainees?
Yeah, and to be very clear, that ruling, the judge could not force the federal government to change its policy like that. It just, like, literally it cannot. So instead, it was just saying that any detention that is made in this way is illegal. So what does that mean? Your question was for detainees.
Yeah.
It means that if they have representation or if they're representing themselves, they can sue, basically, but it would have to be individually. Sue saying, you know, this is unlawful detention, and go through a case like that. And, you know, continue to not only then fight their immigration case, but also that one as well for their unlawful detention. And, you know, we think about on a granular level what that means for a person or family that's already probably limited in resources, and it's very difficult. I've been told, we heard from Sergio in this piece, to be able to get things organized, like even if you have a lawyer to facilitate your case. It takes a lot of support to be able to move forward. It's not easy. So adding another, but they have the right to, and they can go through and go that way. But from that granular level to a larger level, the other consideration is that there are people all across the country who theoretically could say, I'm in detention right now, and I was detained under this policy that a judge in California has ruled illegal. And so what does that do to the courts? Does it cause, you know, even more of a backlog? There's already, everybody will joke about how long cases can take, and what does it do to the system when everybody has to individually try their case rather than something that would be widespread and basically make it a non-issue. But that's the way that they would have to go about this right now, is citing basically precedent now that has been set in California and pursue their own case with a lawyer or themselves.
Lauren, you spent a lot of time learning about these detention facilities. So what do you know about the conditions inside of them?
So to be very clear, getting access to actually go inside a facility is non-existent right now. There are security reasons for that, but also that's just what we were told for some of the facilities that we were trying to even just speak with people in. If there was a detainee who was there, to be clear, sometimes families, are not really even going in person. It's all virtual and things like that. So I want to be very clear. I did not step inside physically and see for myself with my own eyes. Everything that I'm about to say has been folks from within or reporting that's been done that kind of paints a picture of what conditions are like, and they're very specific to certain places. So what I can say is I actually mentioned this earlier, the FCI Leavenworth facility. So this is the federal prison that is contracting with ICE, beds, giving ICE beds. There was a letter that the ACLU had written, ACLU Kansas, to the warden of that facility, to an ICE contact as well, basically alleging a slew of issues that were going on inside the facility, ranging from overcrowding to the conditions being so poor that there were a couple of people mentioned in this letter that attempted suicide, issues with access to medical care, alleging that people who have won their immigration case are still unlawfully being detained. So these are allegations that are in this letter that is, online that you can see. And the warden had responded and, basically pushed back on a majority of the issues that the ACLU Kansas was alleging, and basically doubled down, saying that it's doing its due diligence according to its standards that it has to follow, and just operating a federal prison like that to make sure that detainees are safe and taken care of. And so that's just one example in one facility that got some attention in the summer of 2025 over conditions inside. That's one example.
Wow. So how are these facilities being held accountable so that standards are being met?
Yeah, so this is something that we talked quite a bit about with Chase County Detention Center, in particular, the sheriff there, Jacob Welsh, who walked us through what that process looks like for his facility, but it also applies to any ICE contracted facility. And so he was saying that once a week there's a compliance officer that will visit and interview detainees and check in on how operations are going. He says once a week that compliance officer is with the Department of Homeland Security. Additionally, there are 2 inspections that happen in a year, and these are the deep inspections that are being conducted at the facility. And what are they basing these inspections off of? Well, it's something that's called the National Detention Standards. This thing is 232 pages full of rules and regulations about how things should be conducted inside an ICE detention facility or ICE contract detention facility. So in there, you kind of see things ranging from use of force to the food, medical care, religious practices. It's pretty wide ranging in subject on what those standards should be. And so they'll go through, and he's described this group. It's like a cohort of 10 to 12 people, and he explained that they're coming from different branches, if you will, of within the industry, so they might have different expertise. And they come in and they, again, will interview detainees separately, he says, and just inspect, go through, check everything that needs to be checked according to these standards, and come up with a report. So in our reporting, he was explaining to us that they came up in their most recent inspection with 3 deficiencies, and they were all under the same category, and that had to do with signage in their lobby, explaining to people when an attorney could come and visit a client or what the hours looked like. And so they were dinged on that because the hours that were posted were not accurate, or they weren't long enough, or something to that extent. And they corrected that, and that's it. So it's flagging things like that. Apart from, and by the way, that document is available online. Like you can find the inspection reports. But something that I have to note about these inspections is that I asked him, I said, well, who all is part of this cohort? I get that they're industry leaders, but are they with also the Department of Homeland Security? And he explained that they are companies that are contracted by DHS. So for example, there's a group called Nakamoto Group that is contracted pretty frequently or historically to participate in these kinds of inspections. And so when I started to dig a little deeper, I found that the Office of the Inspector General, they had done a whole report about these inspections and whether or not they are doing what they need to do. So this was called, what they found was ICE's inspections and monitoring of detention facilities do not lead to sustained compliance or systemic improvements. This was released in 2018, this report, and it listed 5 recommendations to improve this process, basically, and listed the recommendations, and it additionally said that ICE had agreed with those recommendations and was coming up with a plan to address these issues. So, I mean, you can see it's pretty thorough. They went through this, and so there's basically something to be said about these inspections are happening, but what's the quality of them? And the federal government determined, there's issue with it. One of the examples I can give you is the Nakamoto Group, which I just mentioned. They described it as a pretty small company. And so it was suggesting that there was issue with really being able to handle the scope and scale of these inspections with that company in particular, and whether it's availability of people to do it and the depth of the inspection. That's just one example of one of the issues that it brought up, but it's really interesting to dig into that, and it gives you a better idea of what these inspections typically look like. And I should note that when this came out, our current White House border czar, Tom Homan, was the acting ICE director at the time. So, just a little bit of a through line there between the previous administration and now within their second term. And, some of the same people being involved back then are part of it now.
Wow, this really is all so interesting. And to go along with this, how long are these ICE detainees typically in detention for?
It depends. It depends on the case and what they're dealing with. So Sergio, as you saw, he was in detention for 2 months. He was around 2 months, and then he won his case and he was released. For somebody like Julio Rojas, who we spoke with in our arrest portion of the reporting, he had a final removal order that existed. An immigration judge had determined that he should be deported. And so when he was arrested and put into detention, it was a lot quicker, right? He already had gone through the immigration proceeding process. And so in total, he was in detention for 21 days. And I should add that those 21 days were not within one facility. I actually found that a lot of the detentions we have on one side, and we can kind of show you this so you can see what I'm talking about. There are unique identifiers that basically represent individuals. They represent people. And one of the things I had to be careful of when I was trying to figure out, well, how many detentions are there, across Missouri or across Kansas, is repeat individuals. And you realize, well, there's so many repeats because they keep transferring them, they keep moving them. So those 21 days for him, he described being at 3 to 4 different facilities before being deported. So that just kind of paints a picture for you. So if there's already an existing removal order, it goes a lot faster. If you need to go through court proceedings, there's due process. There are arguments on right now what court proceedings are looking like and whether there's due process, but at the end of the day, there's due process to go ahead and work through your case. You're just behind bars while you're doing so, and that would mean that it's a lot longer.
Lauren, again, thanks so much for painting that picture for me. I really appreciate you sitting down with me on KCTV 5+ to dig deeper into the detention centers and beyond the border.
Thank you.